Hi, this is Jason from the Biblical Comic Universe, and today we're looking at DC's War of the Gods number 4 from 1991. And we're looking at the Christian themes that are found in this particular comic book. Now, I'm not doing this cynically, I'm doing this with joy, I'm doing this with love for comics, and so I'm taking it at face value what the story is saying. So I'm not trying to say the story is trying to say anything negative about Christianity. I'm just going with what ideas are in the story about Christianity. So, brief overview of the story before we get into the theology is War of the Gods was a mini-series that focused on mainly Wonder Woman and the Greek and Roman gods and all the mythological gods kind of fighting it out. And so I really enjoyed this story. I had a lot of fun. It was one of the first big events I remember reading as a kid too, because I was more of a Marvel comic book guy than a DC. So this one and Armageddon 2001 were kind of the first, um, my almost first introduction to DC events. So let's get into really what I want to talk about though, which is this: the Wizard Shazam. Okay, let's talk about the Wizard Shazam first of all. In the DC universe, well, first of all, Captain Marvel was a character created in the 40s by Fawcett, not DC Comics or Marvel Comics. And he had the powers, and Shazam stood for different things. Each letter standing for a different mythological character or power. And the Wizard Shazam gives that ability to this young boy who, when he says the name Shazam, he turns into Captain Marvel. Fast forward many decades later, DC Comics bought the character, but because it's DC Comics, they're mostly calling him Shazam instead of Captain Marvel, except for in book. And but the Wizard Shazam was a character. So here's what the story is, and this issue that's relevant here is it's here. Back before I took on the name of Shazam, I was but a young wizard, hungry for much knowledge, and my mind would hold. I heard of the wise king of Israel who had guided his kingdom through years of peace and prosperity. Well, wait, who is he talking about? First of all, I would like to comment that that does not necessarily look Israeli to me. That looks more Babylonian, but whatever. I might be wrong. But then the next panel. On that day in Jerusalem, when a nomadic wizard was granted audience with King Solomon the Wise, the legend of Shazam was born. Solomon was an open minded ruler, rare in his day. His relations with Egypt, Tyre, and the Edomites had opened up immense libraries of knowledge to him, and he devoured them voraciously. And despite the rest which later besieged his reign and his own failing health, he always had time for me. He to share that knowledge. How could the world bear the loss of such a man? So it was, as Solomon lay on his deathbed, I performed the greatest act of wizardry I had ever attempted. I gathered into my bosom but a small fraction of his essence, his wisdom, and left Israel, never to return. Solomon once spoke of a companion from all mankind, the lightning that escorted me, signature my destiny. Da-da-dum. So, from there, he assembles the powers from the other gods, which is, so he goes to Achilles, fearless Achilles. He goes to Atlas, which is he goes to the Greek. It looks like he was the the Roman Hercules. For some reason, there's a Roman and Greek Hercules in this. They're not just the same character. And then Mercury gives him speed, and then Zeus gives him powers. So the other ones are by the Greek and Roman gods. So let's go back to this though. This is very interesting. So basically, in canon, in the DC universe, King Solomon was real. And it should be clear that, like in other stories, other Judeo-Christian things are real. Definitely, heaven and hell is real in the DC universe. God is referred to as the presence, the all-knowing presence. Um, Angels are real, and but in the context, let's focus on the context of this issue, which is King Solomon. So in the Bible, King Solomon had a dream and asked for wisdom, and God gave him a dream. So it was the Holy Spirit's wisdom. It was the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. It wasn't just the fact that Solomon himself was wise in knowledge and had knowledge. He was wise in this in because of the divine wisdom of God. This still gives that sense, but it also in the context of this story, I think it's because of this line here. It's saying like immense knowledge was given to him. Um, it kind of infers that like he became wise because he had a library from all his wives, I guess. Because in the Bible he had countless wives and countless concubines, and in the Bible, those wives turned him away from God. So his wisdom in the Bible was not from his wives and from marrying all those nations and acquiring their libraries. His wisdom was from just divine wisdom from God. This one, it kind of emphasis more on the knowledge that Solomon would have gained, without without I think still but still allowing for the idea that God gave divine wisdom. It is interesting that Solomon would give him this idea of the idea of a champion who would become Captain Marvel. That's kind of fun in a way, although theologically it probably makes no sense. Why Solomon would basically say, "Oh yeah, why don't you go to these Greek and Roman gods and ask for them for superpowers so that you could conform to Ultimate Champion?" That makes no sense. But it is what it is, and I don't think it's meant to be any slight against Christianity. I think it's just a fun little nod that the wisdom of Solomon is the greatest part of the gift of Shazam, and and as well in the context of Wonder Woman in the story. Wonder Woman is a character who existed before the time. Well, the Amazons would have existed by the time of Jesus, not Wonder Woman herself necessarily, but it's just a fun little nod, I think, and as I said, DC Universe has had many other interesting parallels with Christianity. But in this story, we're going to take it as face value that it is referring to the idea that King Solomon was one of the wisest people who ever lived on earth, and his wisdom was from God. Okay, let's just take it on that value alone. Thank you, and we'll talk again.